the Governance Committee to order. The first order of business is roll call, please.
Henry Jones.
Here.
Mona Pascal-Rogers.
Here.
Rob Beckner.
Good afternoon.
Lisa Middleton.
Present.
Stacy Oliveris.
Here.
Jason Perez.
Here.
Ramon Rubalcava.
Here.
Okay, thank you. I'd also like to note that Ms. Brown, Mr. Miller, Ms. Taylor, Ms. Yee, and Mr. Ruffino are also present at this meeting. Okay, the next order of business is executive report, approval of the Board Governance Committee timed agenda. Need a motion for that? Moved by Mr. Perez, second by Mr. Fechner. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The item passes. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is executive report. Mr. Jacobs.
Yes, good afternoon, Chair Jones and members of the board. You have a very packed agenda this afternoon, so in the interest of time, I'm just going to pass on the executive report and pass it over to my colleagues to get going on the substantive agenda.
Okay, thank you. Before we go to that, we do have the consent items, action consent items. Do we have a motion? Moved by Mrs. Middleton, second by Mr. Rubalcava. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, the item passes. Nothing has been requested to be removed from the information consent items, so now we would go to item 6. But before we get started, I'd like to take a moment and set the stage for our discussion this afternoon. More than a year ago, we set a goal of assessing our strengths and identifying opportunities for us to enhance our governance and our performance as a board. We did this through surveys and interviews and had 100% participation of all board members. The findings from our work included a list of qualities that unite us as a board and even longer lists of areas that we felt need some improvement. Many ideas emerged on how we could enhance our governance and be more effective in our oversight role of the system. What we have before us today is a culmination of our work and a set of recommendations that's set forth by our own colleagues. Each one of these recommendations is stitched together and serves as the fabric of good governance for us and, even more importantly, for the members we serve. I want to thank the Workstream leaders for taking on this important work and driving us forward. It is critical that this work is driven by the board, and the work is very timely. The Center for Retirement Research at Boston College issued a new study in early August. The research shows that public pension funds with good governance have the best performance. I was also delighted to see that the National Association of Corporate Directors has once again given their prestigious award to Ann Simpson, our Board Governance and Strategy Director. NACD has recognized Ann as one of the 100 most influential people in the boardroom. Congratulations, Ann, for winning this award for the last 8 years in a row. So that's quite an accomplishment. It demonstrates that we are in good hands. I'm personally proud that we have taken up this challenge of improving our governance, raising the bar for ourselves so that we can perform the very best of our ability. Before I turn it over to Ann, I wanted to address the process for going through the next several agenda items, 7A through 7E. They're identified as action items. However, that does not mean that the committee is required to take action at this time. If a committee member feels they need additional information in order to make a decision, they can make a motion to postpone the decision to a future meeting. With that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Ann, who will provide a broader overview of how we got here today. Ann?
Thank you very much, Chair Jones. Thank you to all the board members who've participated in this project. And also, I'd like to recognise Dana Hollinger, who was part of one of the work streams when Lisa Middleton joined the board. Ms. Middleton graciously took over that role, but she's not here today. But a lot of her good work is being shown in the recommendations coming forwards, and we greatly appreciate that. I think that Chair Jones has really highlighted the most important points to bring forwards. The first is that CalPERS for many years has had a policy of carrying out a self-evaluation every 2 years. This time, I think the depth and the breadth of the process are truly world-class. By partnering with the leading authority in the field, the board has access to best practices, to leading thinking, and the experience of an independent body. And as Chair Jones said, this whole process has taken over a year. And that really, I think, is a reflection of the board's commitment to self-improvement and the dedication of each board member who's participated to see how CalPERS' own governance can be strengthened. Because if there's one thing we've learned in our corporate governance program, it's that governance affects returns. Governance affects performance. And we've had this view for some years, I suppose, that that must be true in all types of organisation. And I think the beauty of the research which Chair Jones referenced and which he asked to be circulated to all board members is that a leading authority has said, you know what? The same applies. Sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander, or the governance goose. Regardless of the organisation, if you meet high standards of transparency and accountability, and you have diversity of perspectives and a vision and a culture to meet your objectives, then you're going to be a high-performing pension fund and health system. So we greatly appreciate the timing, if nothing else, of this Boston College research, because it really puts some numbers to something which I think until now has been an assumption, maybe a fair assumption, but now we really have some evidence, and it's always important to work from evidence. So, welcoming our new board member, Ms. Olivares, and maybe also just to recap for all the board members, some of whom joined us halfway through the process. And I have to say, every single new board member immediately got involved, either by joining a work stream or by having briefings and giving input to the beta testing, particularly on the new technology platform that's being built to support a lot of this work. I also want to acknowledge that it wasn't just the board members, it was also their designees who've given a lot of time, wisdom, and insight into this project. So as Chair Jones rightly says, this is by the board and for the board, and it's with that this project has strength. So just to recap on the timing, the self-evaluation was launched in October last year. But prior to that, we were delighted to have Kerry Dominguez from the NACD come to the board offsite and introduce the whole project of a board self-evaluation and explain how NACD went about this. And Kerry will add some remarks in a few moments when I've finished just recapping the background. The way that the evaluation was structured was, first of all, to have confidential surveys. Now, why does confidentiality matter? Well, it's almost like going into the confessional. For those of you brought up in the Catholic community, we all understand what that means. The point of the confidentiality was to allow a frank conversation, to allow sensitive issues to be raised in an honest way, because the purpose of this is to improve how the board, its committees, and individual board performance is assessed. The importance of working with NACD was the expertise, many years, I think 40 years, Kerry, of NACD experience that we could draw upon. But of course, CalPERS is a sort of an interesting beast. CalPERS has many special features, so NACD worked with us to tailor their normal process for the purposes of a public pension fund like CalPERS. I'd also like to thank Rick Funston, who was involved in helping develop the technology project at the time, for weighing in. It was extremely valuable. There were 3 online surveys. Again, I just want to say, 100% participation, as Chairman Jones said. Every single board member at that point fully completed all 3 surveys, one on the board, one on the committees, and one on individual attributes and approaches. On top of that, through Kerry, every board member gave of their time to do a one-on-one confidential interview to allow complex and challenging and sensitive issues to be raised so that Kerry could then, when she came to the board in January, feed all of this rich collection of input and insight from the board members. And that was her presentation. We've linked all of the presentations. Sorry, Lexi, you were ahead of me. Thank you. I think you're more on point with the slide timing, and I'm trying to jump ahead. In the presentation, it's only a short recap, but we've given you the link to each of those presentations from prior board and committee meetings so that you can go back in and have a look at what was said. Because a year is a long time, and I know this is our 5th discussion with committee and board members on these topics, but it's important to be able to go back and see how the thinking from the board work streams has evolved. But suffice to say, the January feedback session, which I'll let Kerry recap for you in just a moment, was followed by a March presentation on progress, and also in June. And of course, we had a 4-hour discussion with board members at the July offsite last month. And of course, throughout the process, it's not just been input from board members and comments that we've received and you've received directly from stakeholders. We've had the ability to tap into best practice through NACD. So I think I'd like to hand over to Kerry for these last 2 slides, because these really are the NACD findings. And before we move into the recommendations, Chair, this is just more of the scene setting. I think looking at the package of recommendations the board work streams are coming forwards with, as you rightly say, they're woven from whole cloth. They're connected to each other. But the most important thing is the cloth that they're woven from is the board's own findings. So in other words, the findings are all about what is it that the board is trying to achieve? What are the goals? And for me, the test of good recommendations is they're very focused in a practical way on something you want to make better. And if we make the governance better, we expect this is going to help CalPERS improve its performance. And that's the one goal where we are all absolutely, management, board, consultants and stakeholders, we all firmly agree this is a priority for us at CalPERS. So let me hand to Kerry, if I may, for the last couple of slides. One on what the board evaluation found were the board's strengths, in other words, how the board itself had identified its strengths. And as Chair Jones put it rather nicely, what were the opportunities? It's like the board's report card on itself, where some more work could be done. So Kerry, let me hand over to you and let you take a quick recap on the findings on strengths and findings on opportunities.
Great. Well, thank you, Anne and Chair Jones and members of the committee as well as members of the board. I'm delighted to be back, and I am, on behalf of NACD, let me say how encouraged we are to see the tremendous interest that you've taken in leading practices and continuous improvement. As Anne mentioned, this is not a destination, this is a journey. And so as things change, and this morning you heard from Hero, you heard about the aging, the demographics issues, the macro and microeconomic issues, all of these things have a tremendous impact on governance and how you position the structure of governance going forward. So to be fit for future, whatever that future may bring, the continuous improvement process is critical. So I'm delighted to share once again the results. This is all your work. and the work of previous board members, but very insightful comments, very thoughtful feedback, and in terms of the strength, again, the overriding component was a tremendous commitment that every board member has expressed towards the mission of CalPERS, making sure that the sustainability, the value creation for current as well as future stakeholders is there. So it's a tremendous dedication that all of you need to really, it needs to be recognized, and you need to be congratulated for such commitment. Equally, your practices of transparency and dedication to accountability was identified as another major strength. Again, it's a continuous process, so there's always opportunities for improvement, but you certainly have identified that as an important strength, and similarly, the diversity that you have. This is one of the most diverse boards that I've ever presented to, and believe me, it'll be one of the most diverse boards for a long time to come, because we just don't have this level of diversity in most boards. So congratulations to you on that, and for your commitment to making sure you not just have diversity in terms of race, color, gender, religion, and other kinds of characteristics, but also diversity in terms of the expertise that you bring, the focus that you bring, the interest that you bring in representing the different sectors that you represent. And certainly stakeholder engagement and how important that is to all of you. That was identified 100% again by all of the board members. And as we mentioned, desire for continuous improvement. And so this is really a continuation of that work. How can we make it better? What's out there? What does NACD have? NACD serves as a mirror of leading practices. What does it have that we could tailor and adapt to make our own organization high-performing, highly effective, and a strategic asset to your stakeholders? So those were the strengths that were identified. In terms of opportunities for improvement, opportunities for further development, consistently the comments revolved around, we need role clarification. We need to better understand our responsibilities as a member of the board, as a member of a committee, and as an individual board member. All three levels, which, by the way, all three levels were assessed and evaluated by all the board members. Looking for more professional board development, looking for a richer program of board education. What's out there? What are the trends that we really need to be aware of? How is that going to affect our strategy? Without the education, without the types of presentations that you hear, and some complementary education, it's a challenge to try to stay on top of what's happening in a very fast-changing environment. Developing a board curriculum, again, to further strengthen the skills and your expertise. There was a lot of discussion about equitable allocation of remunerated board time. We understand that compensation is something that varies depending on how you joined the board, what you represent, and so that came up as something that perhaps at some point in the future, if not now, needs to be looked at and needs to be addressed, and look for ways to make it more equitable. Materials. How do we make sure that the meeting agenda and the materials presented really are supportive of the key operating and strategic issues? What's the priority? How do we prioritize the agenda items? Those kinds of things came up at every conversation that I had. The calendar and format for board meetings, again. How often do we meet? What's the importance of meeting regularly for the full board? We understand that committee structures and how committees meet, the whole purpose of a committee is a delegation of skills, of expertise, of knowledge to specific individuals assigned to various committees that can then get into a deep dive and can provide that specialized knowledge, make it more efficient for then discussion at the full board level. So that's a very important component in committee structure and committee composition. Similarly, you raised a number of issues regarding the role of board consultants and whether or not this body was really maximizing the benefit of consultants across all areas of interest. And finally, developing a board code of conduct. There was a lot of discussion in our one-on-ones regarding the importance of creating a culture. Is a culture of transparency, a culture of mutual respect, a culture of collegiality, a culture of trust, and what is the operating framework for creating that type of conduct? You know, in sports, we talk about that. We just had the World Cup. The World Cup, you know, you have certain requirements, and if you don't do it, you get the yellow card or you get the red card, and it's not a very pleasant experience for those who are affected by it. Out of bounds, whatever it is, every organization has a set of standards of conduct that is expected. And so all of the participating board members raised this as an issue that was an important one for preserving the confidentiality of your deliberations. And so out of that, you came up, I should say, with the 5 board work streams. And again, the role of NACD was to provide you with support, with leading practices, to perhaps tailor some of these leading practices that were customized to your own unique and particular areas. So with that, let me send it back to Ann.
And before you move on, I got a note that someone had requested to speak on 5A, so I'm going to pause before we get into the meat of our agenda today and recognize Mr. Tim Behrens. He had asked to speak on 5A.
Thank you, President Jones and committee members and board members. So I want to talk about the agenda item on the calendar again, and I don't see the 2020 in this packet, so I'm assuming that it was just left out of there by mistake.
No, we'll be discussing it later today.
Oh, okay. Well, that's what I'm here to talk about, so I'll talk about it now and listen to you later. Is that all right?
Yes, go ahead. You got 3 minutes.
Okay, so one of the things I saw on there was an offsite where stakeholders and the board and staff would meet. I think that's an excellent idea, great idea. One of my recommendations for your consideration is that on one of those canceled board months, that you consider having a one-item agenda item like mental health. I think that the last hour spent on the talk on mental health signifies that we need to meet with the healthcare providers providing mental health to our stakeholders, and that would be a great opportunity to spend a half a day with them sitting at this table with you, asking them questions, and us from the audience having an opportunity to speak. I think that would be a great benefit to the stakeholders, the board, and the staff. I also want to comment, because I left it out in my first presentation, that we do in fact have the ability to call staff that are in charge of the health program for CalPERS anytime, any day, and we get answers whenever we ask them. And I want to commend staff for their ability to work with us on those kinds of issues. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Okay, and when we get to item 8, we'll be getting Ashley Dunning on the phone. That's the board's fiduciary counsel, in case any board member may have a question for her. So just know that we'll pause at that stage when we get to 8. Okay, Ann?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Again, thank you very much. And I'm remiss for not introducing Kerry Dominguez again. She's a board member of NACD. She's had experience in California. She's a commissioner on the Equal Opportunities Board. She's been on corporate boards and is a highly respected figure in the business community. Her biography has been circulated on more than one occasion, but I do apologise for. We're sort of like, you know, neighbours now. We all know each other by first name and forget to say hello and how are you. So, Chair, what I'd like to do is just finish with the final slide, if I may, on this information item. There's one more. Yep, thank you. There's a, thank you. So this graphic really shows how all of that work has translated into the recommendations that you're going to hear from the work streams. And what it shows is how the working groups have put together a set of recommendations which support each other. And I think this graphic really shows that this is like building a bridge. You have each section of the bridge, and altogether these sections make the bridge stronger. So the first recommendation that will come forward when we move to the action item will come from the board work stream that looked at the issues of education. And this was Ms. Taylor, Ms. Pasquill-Rogers. That's number one. Number two was a work stream, again, which the board president put together. And it was your good self and Ms. Yee, looking at this whole question of role and responsibilities and how do we bring clarity. And they have some proposals for you to consider. The third work stream that the president put together was on meetings and materials. And David Miller, thank you, and Dana Hollinger began this work. And when Dana stepped down, Lisa Middleton had just joined the board. And thank you, Ms. Middleton, for coming in for the second reel of the movie and just not missing a beat. The fourth work stream which the president established was on considering the value that the board may derive from developing its own code of conduct. And that work has been led by Mr. Fechner and Mr. Perez. All of this sits on top of a new technology platform called Insight. And you've had a look at this at the July offsite. You've also, on those of you who've been involved on the beta testing, thank you, Ms. Brown, thank you, Mr. Rubalcava, thank you, Mr. Ruffino, on behalf of the Treasurer and others who've taken the time to really look at this tool and give a lot of feedback. But the idea of this Insight tool is for you to consider the approval of a further development that's going to give you real-time, comprehensive access to the information that you need during, before, in preparation, and between meetings. So I think with that, Chair Jones, I would be very glad to answer any questions, but this is really the end of our overview of the process and the main points that are about to follow.
Right, so that's great. So why don't we just go right in, starting at 7A. You have a overhead slide presentation, and let's deal with that one by one and see what the pleasure of the committee is, and if it's approved, then we go to the next one. If it's deferred, we'll move it and still go to the next one. So let's just move straight through.
Thank you. With no further ado, my job here is to be the messenger. I do invite the workstream leads to add to the recommendation in any way that they see fit. I'm simply here to help bring it all together and present the recommendation to you. So Workstream 1 has the following recommendation. First, to direct management as follows. 1, to enrich the onboarding program for board members and for their designees. Also, to develop tailored education modules for each committee and doing this through partnering with specific organisations, really just to build up the independence and expertise. There's more discussion in the agenda item itself, but I think in the interests of time, Chair, we'll just move from the recommendation.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, are there any questions on this recommendation? Mr. Miller.
No, I just think it would be nice to hear from Ms. Dominguez if she has any thoughts on this particular recommendation in terms of best practice or in terms of NACD's advice or.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. I think it's an excellent recommendation. The whole standing of NACD is on board education, and we have a curriculum of different programs. We're now moving towards a certification program for board members to make sure that at a minimum there's a certain general understanding of the various roles and responsibilities of a board member. That's something that no other organization has tackled. It's a very difficult one. I was on the panel that was involved in that development of the certification process. It's going to be a very comprehensive one, but I think it speaks to the importance of continuing to elevate our professionalism as board members and our understanding of the complexities that are facing. So I believe this is a real critical component, and from NACD's perspective, we would wholeheartedly support it.
Okay, so seeing no further requests to speak, I'm going to call for the motion in a moment, but we have a request to speak on this item, 7A. Larry Whitson.
You know, I don't think I want to speak on this item per se. It was confusing to me. I think I need to pick out. I didn't know you were going to make decisions after every one, so I was going to speak at the very end. But if you're going to make a decision as you go through, maybe I could hold my hand when you come to the
item
one
you
I
want
want to speak on.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, you watch this hand. Okay. Okay, so this motion on this item, Mr. Fechner.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move both recommendations be adopted.
Okay, moved by Mr. Fechner. Second by Mr. Rubalcava. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The item passes. Thank you. We move to item 7B. Ms. Simpson.
Oops. Forgetting the microphone. I'll just pull this up, this recommendation. So this work stream is addressing the whole issue of roles and responsibilities. And there's more discussion in the agenda item. But the recommendation, in the interest of time, is simply as follows. The workstream recommendation is first to propose a change in the CalPERS rules and guidelines for the conduct of meetings, which would bring the Rosenbergs Rules of Order, which were developed in California, to be the parliamentary authority in substitute for Robert's Rules. And just to help you all get prepared, we gave you the 700-page edition of Robert's Rules before the meeting, because I think some people have not seen it before. So the first recommendation has a slightly technical wording because of the need to ensure that we don't lose anything in the process. The second part of the recommendation is that that the board direct management to redraft the board's policies and documents in plain English. And if that is approved, red line versions of all the materials will come back for consideration by the governance committee and approval by the board. So if there are any questions, please let me know. That's a bit of a short summary of a big issue.
Good, thank you. No questions. We do have a request to speak on this item. We have Ms. Jepson, Mr. Darby, and Mr. Fontaine. If you would all come down, and you will have 3 minutes to speak, and state your name and your organizations. Oh, just a minute. Just a minute. Before you speak, we do have questions from the board members that just came up, so I want to let you go ahead. Mr. Miller?
Yeah, again, I kind of wanted to come back to Ms. Dominguez and see if she has any thoughts on these recommendations. You can see a pattern developing here, perhaps.
Well, thank you. NACD has actually thoroughly reviewed the Rosenbergs Rules, and we believe they are consistent with the Roberts Rules, except a lot more updated and a lot simpler. And I know Ms. Middleton mentioned that at the last session that we had a month ago. And so we are very supportive, but we believe that the clearer the understanding, plain English is perfect for better understanding your roles and responsibilities. And certainly Rosenbergs Rules are a significant improvement over the 800 pages that Roberts Rules provide. So we're very supportive of this recommendation.
And Ms. Dominguez, why don't we have you comment on H1 after it's presented to see if there's your observation? And
Will do.
Mr. Miller won't have to ask each time. Okay. Mr. Perez.
In regards to the redrafting the board policies and documents in plain English, it seems like a lot of work for the team to have to jump into. Is there a way we can just put like a glossary instead of having to have the team redo everything? Because even some of that stuff can get lost in translation.
Yeah, thank you very much. I hope it wouldn't be lost in translation. I'd be really stuck. I think this is a really important project, and I perhaps can turn to my colleague, Matt Jacobs, on this. And here's why. I think in translating into plain English, that means terms that everyone can understand. That's not only for the board. I think this is really important for the stakeholders, so that everybody knows who's meant to be doing what, when, where, and how all the different pieces hang together. So I accept your point, Mr. Perez, that it's a lot of work, but as I'm your resident governance geek, I actually think this is really important, that we have simplicity and clarity to help understanding. So it might take time. Sorry?
I thought the board, was directing this.
Oh, yes. I meant just saying that if it's a concern about it being a burden of work, it's a burden that I would welcome.
So it would follow
as
to you?
Management. But I'm asking the General Counsel to comment. He may.
I hope it's falling to Anne, because I mean, I think it would be a substantial amount of work. We haven't discussed this, but
sorry, that's funny.
But so we'd have to collaborate. I don't think the idea would be that we bring this all back next month. But over time, we would work on redraft. The critical thing to me is that with respect to this recommendation is revise both the board's rules and guidelines and the board governance policy to effectuate this change. The change that is most significant to me from a governance perspective is the change to Rosenbergs Rules as opposed to Roberts Rules. And I think that could be done in relatively short order. I don't know if we could do it by next month, but we could do it relatively quickly. But that's what needs to be done. Then the part about plain English, I really don't know what Ms. Simpson and Ms. Dominguez or anybody else had in mind, or really the people who put that forward. But we'll do it in due time, to be sure. I don't know, so I don't really know what the demands are there.
Let's. Okay. Ms. Yee.
Thank you. Our committee chairman and I were the leads on this work stream, and I think we looked at this a little bit more broadly than just kind of how it's stated here in terms of redrafting the policies and documents in plain English. This really gives us an opportunity to also reviewed the board policies with respect to clarity and potentially, and with any kind of board policy, being sure that it syncs up with our authority. But this is meant to at least have the policies be more accessible to not just the board, but to all of our stakeholders. And so particularly if we're preparing a lot of our information to be on this Insight platform, it's just to have it be more user-friendly, I guess. But I think it's just a good governance practice to review our policies from time to time anyway, for clarity's sake. And I know we've done this. I chair board governance at CalSTRS, and it was actually a very informative exercise.
Okay. Okay, so now we will go to Ms. Jepson.
Is it on? Yes. Kathy Jepson, CSU IRFSA. I really don't have a complaint because I don't have an answer. I did have a question, and it's on the benefits and risk. You probably have different page numbers, but it says the risk in replacing Roberts Rules with Rosenberg Rules, if there is one, is the, and then when you flip to the next page, it doesn't finish the sentence. It just says attachments 1, 2, and 3.
I do apologize. I'd be glad to share the copy that I have.
Great.
It seems as though there might have been a page stuck in the photocopier.
And while I'm on that subject, Anne, I'd like to personally thank you because I know how much hard work that you put through in this. So please don't take this as a complaint about all that you've done. The other thing is that when I look at the Robertson's rules, which they look awfully simplified. And to me, it gives a lot of wiggle room into what you're trying to do. I don't think Robert's Rules of Order is the answer. But then, on the other hand, I think that the Rosenbergs rules are maybe too simplistic. So maybe you want to take a look at, doing a comparison. I don't think that lowering standards is really what you're intending to do. I think that if a person is a board member, they need to be familiar with Robert's Rules of Order or the rules that you are going to adopt. So I think that the answer is somewhere between the two. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Darby.
No, go ahead. Al Darby, President, RPEA. In addition to the remarks that Ms. Jepson made, which suggests some shortcomings in the Rosenberg system, I've attended numerous meetings, CalPERS committee and board meetings over many years, and never observed a serious problem associated with Robert's Rules of Order. So to me, there's an apropos expression that applies here, and that is, if it ain't fixed or if it ain't broke, why fix it? Why learn a new system if the old one still works well? I have seen no problems with Robert's Rules in any committee or board meeting that I've ever attended. Thank you.
Mr. Fontaine.
Yes, I'm Geri Fontaine, Chief Financial Officer of California State Retirees, and I want to thank you for this opportunity to speak. I think this is mixing apples and oranges. You're talking about Robert's Rules of Orders and a method of conducting business, but you're talking about redrafting board policies, delegations, and documents, which is still something different. Yes. Redo your documents to better understandable language, but that has nothing to do with conducting your meetings. Robert's Rules of Orders have worked quite well over a long period of time, and I believe the 700-plus pages better prepares any chair that's conducting a meeting to handle any situation that may come up. So they're better prepared with that. They work good. I'll go along with what Al just said. I haven't seen a problem with them. And Robert's Rules of Orders are basically used throughout other organizations, other committees, no matter how large or small. My way of thinking right now, if, I'll borrow what Kathy said, if you can't meet the standards, what you're trying to do now is lower your standards. Stay with Robert's Rules of Order. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Middleton.
Okay. Just a couple of words, and I want to thank the speakers. The original founding document that drove Judge Rosenberg in the development of what's now known as the Rosenbergs Rules actually was Robert's Rules of Order. And these are, by anyone who has used them, simply a simplification of the original document. With respect to what does happen when there are breakdowns with regard to Roberts, is that almost everyone who has attended a meeting that has been conducted by Robert's Rules of Order believes themselves to be an expert in what those rules say. Yet when actually put in front of a lie detector, almost everyone has to admit that they've not read Robert's Rules of Order in terms of the entire 790-odd pages, and some of them are, in fact, quite odd, addressing matters that are incredibly arcane. What Rosenberg brings is the ability that when there is a dispute over parliamentary procedure, that you're able to get to the source document and rather quickly resolve the issue of parliamentary procedure. And most, I think all of us, are not here to engage in parliamentary debate. We're here to try to resolve issues for our members and for our localities. And I can tell you, as someone who's referenced both, one is not higher or more important than the other. One is just simpler to use.
Okay, thank you. Okay, seeing no further requests, and each of these that requires additional work, we will be getting reports back, and we would have further discussion, clarification, whatever we may need to do to make sure that the outcome is what we intended. So this is the first pass of going forward in this process. Mr. Miller.
Yeah, I'd just make the comment that I would urge the members of the committee to move these recommendations forward. They will still, as Henry said, come back to the full board for if there's any further thoughts or decision by the full board. But I would suggest the committee should move these recommendations forward. A lot of time and effort went into them, and I think they've been well presented.
Okay.
So moved.
Okay, it's been moved by Mr. Fechner. Second by Ms. Yee. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? The item passes. Thank you. Okay, we will now move.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
we had one no vote.
Oh. Who? You're no. Okay, note Mr. Perez as a no, but Ms. Yee, you're not on the committee. You can't. Even though you're part of the team. So I need a second replacement.
So we should use the Rosenbergs
Yeah. So.
Second.
Second by Mrs. Pascal Rogers. Okay, thank you. But you were very involved in the work. You just can't do it. Okay, so let's then move to recommendation 7C.
Thank you. The third area of recommendation, this is Workstream 3.
Yes.
Is looking at an issue that was identified by the board in its self-evaluation as relevant to improving governance and thereby improving performance. And here are the recommendations. The first is to consolidate the two strategy offsites into one. The reason for this is to give a chance to check in on the enterprise strategy and make the discussion more closely focused on tracking the strategic plan. The second is to respond to the commitment to stakeholder engagement and accepting that maintaining public comment continues to be important. Stakeholder engagement briefings continue to be important. This work stream thinks there's room for an additional opportunity for stakeholder dialogue by CalPERS establishing a stakeholder forum. Initially, the thought is this could be annual, but there's no reason for it not to be more frequent than that and to come to different parts of the state. But the goal is to allow an opportunity for stakeholders both to express their concerns in dialogue with the board, and also for CalPERS to be able to have a more in-depth discussion. So that's the second part of the recommendations. The third part of the recommendations is that the committee meetings be scheduled for 4 times a year. If additional meetings are to be needed, then the chair of the committee would be able to respond accordingly. The chief impact of this would be for the investment office, which currently has a cycle of meeting reports, which is distracting from their day job of focusing on performance. That's the concern that's been expressed by the board workstream leads. The number that comes to mind is that 80% of reports are for information, and there have been 511 of these in the last 2 years. And there's such concern to get the focus on performance when we're underfunded that for the investment committee to meet quarterly in sync with the financial reporting quarterly cycle could be beneficial. This recommendation did consider whether the cycle of board meetings themselves should change, and in the course of discussion, their recommendation evolved. So currently, this recommendation proposes that the board meetings stay as they are. In part, this means that stakeholders will continue to have public comment every month, and also will be able to raise any issue that's under consideration in the committees. One benefit that the workstream leads identified here was that typically this would look like a board meeting and 2 committee meetings for each month, which could mean that the 3 days could be shrunk to 2 days, which would save money and save time. They're working on the assumption, of course, that Workstream 5 is approved, which is the new technology platform to give real-time reporting for board members, but also for stakeholders. The final part of their recommendation is looking at the structure of board committees. And what they're recommending is that we have at CalPERS for the board a consistent structure. At the moment, there are 6 committees. 5 of them are committees which meet in addition to the board, apart from investments. The investment committee meets as a committee of the whole, which means there's only one pass at the issues. So to strengthen the due diligence process, really, if I was going to put it in simple terms, it's a question of measure twice, cut once. That's what a committee structure gives you. The committee looks at something, does a deep dive, and then the full board continues to make the decision. Right now, the investment committee does it in one go because the committee is the full board and it makes the decision. It's not a 2-step process. The workstream leads feel that it's important to continue with the current practice, that all board members can attend all meetings, as we have today. Also that the committee meetings would meet in sequence so that all board members can continue to attend all the meetings that they want. But what this would offer board members is choice also about where to focus their attention when they join the board. The investment area, health, pensions, governance, risk, audit, there's a lot of opportunity for work in the committee arena. I offer this to the workstream leads for any further points that I may not have covered, as this is an important and complicated area of governance.
Okay.
So, thank you.
Before Ms. Milton wanted to speak now. Ms. Milton.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to again thank someone who's not here, Dana Hollinger, for her work. It was very intimidating to step in to see the work that had already been done. And so I have great appreciation not only for her, but Ms. Simpson and Mr. Miller. We did, after the last board meeting, go back and revisit the recommendations and came back with the conclusion that moving away from monthly meetings of the board would detract from the ability of the public to be able to engage with us on a monthly basis, and we didn't want to do that. We thought it was important to make sure that as new events arise, and sometimes in an unexpected way, that we always have that ability to come back, as well as new events arise, that staff has the ability to say that there is a critical issue that needs to be addressed. But one of the things that we all know when we're trying to schedule meetings is we need to find a balance between giving staff the time to actually do the job and us having the time to do our oversight responsibilities. So in making a recommendation that we meet 4 times a year, which would probably be quarterly for most committees, but probably not for, as example, Pension and Health, where a strict meeting of just once a quarter would not be appropriate, but that we would schedule at least 4 meetings per year with an expectation that if there were other events that arose, we could always schedule an additional meeting to address those specific needs that would occur. And so this would give us greater flexibility, but it would also give staff the ability to have a bit more time between meetings. And that, as someone who in a former life had to prepare agendas for boards and prepare staff reports for boards, it takes an incredible amount of effort. For every minute that we spend here, there are hours spent by staff preparing for the work that we are going to be presented with. So I think we've hit a really good balance in this. We do believe that if staff is asked to go back and take a look at the 2020 calendar, that it is probable that they could put a calendar together that would include meetings that would be Monday, Tuesday, as opposed to 3-day. But our feeling was, let's challenge staff to see whether or not that works for them and come back and report to us at a later time with how they would structure those meetings. Mr. Miller and I were able to identify on a back of envelope type of analysis that yes, it could be done, but we're not the experts in exactly what needs to be done. Lastly, we really do feel that 2 bites out of the apple are important when it comes to the investment committee. It's an incredibly important committee, but having a full committee causes us to, in effect, treat the investment committee meetings as the full board meeting. And by having a committee, we get the opportunity to dig a little more deeply. But the last 2 days have also been illustrative. And I would suggest, and this comes somewhat from the experience of the last 2 days, we reserve for the chair of the investment committee the ability to always call a meeting of the whole when there are going to be issues such as what we have seen in the last 2 days, where it is clear everyone is going to want to weigh in on the issues, and particularly when we're dealing with educational programs where all of us want to have the value of that education.
Okay, Mr. Fackner.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, I agree with Ms. Middleton on the quarterly versus 4 times a year, because as she pointed out, that would not work well for the Pension and Health Committee. So I think between the chair and vice chair of the committee and the president of the board, the committee should be able to decide when the committees actually meet. As for the offsite, removing an offsite, I would hope that we would consider taking that meant that we're going to leave vacant without an offsite and actually holding education sessions here in our building. We're always looking for educational opportunities. Normally during board week, it's too long or cumbersome of a week already. This would give us a dedicated time to actually have some educational opportunities, so I'd like to consider that. My next piece is the investment committee. My concern is, and I totally understand Mr. Ming's point of needing to have time to actually do the investment side of the house. At the same time, my fear is if we drop down to 4 meetings a year, they're going to be 4 days long. As we've seen what we've been doing here lately. I mean, yesterday was a classic example. We were there until almost 5 o'clock. So I think going down to 4, I think, is a stretch. I would recommend down to 6. Try and see somewhere consistent with like what our sister fund is across the river. But at the same time, I think we need to find a balance to where Mr. Ming can put down reports that are consolidated reports that come out on our diligent page, come out in our board books, that we don't have to sit and go through these reports at board meetings, which takes up a lot of your time and your staff's time. Those can be done in the off months when we have a month and a half to read them, instead of having to sit here and do it during the week, which then would hopefully shorten up the time of your meeting that you actually need to come and meet before us. So those are just some thoughts that I would like us to consider.
Okay. Mr. Miller.
Yeah, I'll kind of try to stay in order on this. One of the things that we were really thinking about in terms of the annual stakeholder forum, and this is, and hats off to Dana and Lisa for jumping in on this with us, was that rather than have a forum where we sit up here on the dais and you all sit there and we can bloviate for as long as we feel like it and you get 2 minutes to talk to us, we could have an actual dialogue. We could do things where we're not even necessarily in this kind of room, where we sit down together and have some structured dialogue and really have conversations that we really can't do in this kind of forum. So that's hopefully some of what our thinking was on that. As far as the schedule of monthly committee meetings, the quarterly is kind of the minimum that we would be looking at. The potential to have 2 days of meetings, but also potentially to have a third day, or for committee chairs to say, no, we need another meeting, as long as we have time for adequate public notice, and the further the better. It wouldn't prevent us from having more meetings. And as was mentioned, we still intend to, whenever we have committee meetings, all the board members who want to attend can attend and can participate. There was no intention for that to change. We're just trying to be more effective and efficient, and especially with regard to the staff work. Those 511 documents wasn't just someone throwing a document together. It was time away from the regular work for Ben and his team. And I know I'm a bureaucrat my whole career. None of those documents come to us without a review chain with review loops and refinements and revisions, and it's a massive amount of time and work and effort. And that the new insight tool will allow the information that we and stakeholders need to be delivered without that massive burden, because I, for one, want Ben and his team focused like lasers on, making that 7% target or better. So that was the thinking there, and we really kind of will defer somewhat to staff to help us, how do we implement this the best, and will there be the need for an additional meeting here or there, or the flexibility? This gives us the flexibility to do it if we need to. And finally, for the board committees, I would assert that investment is the most important committee in many respects. It's the one that the complexity, the importance, the priority, the consequences of not getting it right. And in practical terms, we do not have an investment committee. We have a board. And we really need an investment committee, a subcommittee of that board, for all the reasons you have subcommittees, to have individuals bring their expertise and their desire to do the deeper dive, to work more closely, to get things queued up so that we can be more effective and efficient when that decision comes to the board to make. And every board member will be able to participate, but every board member won't be required to participate in both steps. But to me, it's an addition. It's saying this is important enough that we're going to invest in this additional level of work and effort to make sure we get these decisions right, get them queued up in a way that the board can make more effective and efficient decisions. So it's additive, and that was our view of it.
Mr. Perez.
I don't know the work that he does day in and day out, but I absolutely want to free up time for Ben and his team to concentrate on the investments. The problem I have is in the Constitution and the PERF and all the language, the responsibility of the fund falls onto the board, not staff, to the board. And we delegate that authority to staff. So by us not meeting but once a quarter on different committees, and by us limiting the number of members on the investment staff, I think that just starts to erode the authority that we have and responsibility we have to the members.
Finish.
I would like Ms. Dominguez to, did I miss the part? Did you already say something about this part?
No, I was going to have board members make the comment, and I'll have her to comment. So did you want to say anything else, Mr. Perez?
Let's see. Keep the full board for the committee quarterly meetings. No, that's it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Brown.
Thank you. With respect to the first recommendation for 2 strategy offsites into 1, I'm perfectly fine with that. I want to make the same recommendation I made in July, that we have them close to an airport so people can actually participate and we can get there. Napa was a little far in traffic, so it is complicated. Or just have them here. I mean, it saves us all money. We don't have to have hotels for staff, and it really does save money. So 1, I'm fine with. Annual stakeholder forum, I'm fine with that as long as it does not impact the ability of our stakeholders to get information in the smaller group settings. I think that's still critical for us. I do not agree with the consolidated schedule of monthly meetings into quarterly meetings. I know I've commented, Ms. Taylor's commented, Neil's not here today, but he's commented too that it seems like we're covering less and less information in our meetings. I have concerns with risk and audit, that mainly we're just approving consultants and hiring people who are going to do the work as opposed to actually looking at the risks and reviewing the audits. There's real work to be done. This board has an obligation to provide oversight. We delegate work to the staff, but we keep the authority. We have the responsibility, and we have the financial responsibility personally for what happens. I would not feel comfortable relegating any of my board colleagues as an observer. So if you're talking about making the investment committee a committee of 9, 4 of you would be observers, and I think that's a terrible idea. That means that the investment team, the experts, will come twice because as an observer, you don't get to make motions and you don't get to vote. And so you are actually relegating board members to second-class citizens for the most important meetings we have. I also want to say that monthly meetings of the investment committee have been done forever. They've been going forever, and they've never impacted our returns. They haven't impacted. Look at our 10-year returns. They're fabulous. And what I'm saying is you've got the cause and effect wrong here, I believe. The things that are causing more work for the staff in terms of investment, there's many items that have changed. We've had changes in staffing. You had a major private equity changes starting in July of 2017 that caused a huge disruption in the investment office. And then that strategy kept shape-shifting over the months and for the last 2 years. You've had a turnover in COIOs, and now you've got an investment manager doing COIO, and he's doing equity. I mean, of course they're stressed. You don't have enough staff to do the work. This is my opinion. You had no private equity MID for 2 years. I mean, you had a stand-in, but you didn't have the real manager in there. We had the turnover of the CIO. We had a turnover in board consultants. We had a turnover in asset managers. So all these turnovers caused disruption and more work for the staff. So it's not the monthly meeting that's causing the problem. It's all this turnover. And Ben, I think with you in charge, you're going to fill those positions and stop that turnover. You know, we are not a corporate board. We must do our business in the public. We are more like a school district or a city council, and those people meet 2 times a month. We should not reduce the number of meetings. We owe our beneficiaries accountability, transparency, and that means monthly meetings. And Ben, if you need more staff to get the work done, to hire and keep them, then let us know, and I'm sure we'll be able to approve that. But we should not reduce our oversight role. Thank you.
Ms. Oliveris?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I want to start with a question. The annual stakeholder forum, how much do we expect that to cost?
I'm just asking Brad Pacheco if he'd kindly answer that question as he organizes stakeholder affairs.
Hi, Brad Pacheco, CalPERS team. Ann and I have talked about this a little bit. As she pointed out, it says an annual stakeholder forum, but certainly could be more than one. I think we'd have to assess what the goals of the board are to accomplish, and we could do that and look at where we could hold this and whether it be in multiple places across the state. It's hard to determine what the cost would be. I can give you an estimate that when we hold our board offsites, they're anywhere between $30,000 and $50,000 during the month. We have our benefit education events that we also hold. They're approximately the same cost, so it's really going to depend on the format of the event, but it would probably require a contract with a hotel or space, and some travel by the team if we did it outside of Sacramento. So that would be kind of a best case estimate.
What is the cost of the diversity forum?
The diversity forum, off the top of my head, it was split between CalPERS and CalSTRS, and I believe it ended up roughly $35,000 to $40,000 per system, and that included the contract with the convention center, any speakers, logistics, setup, audio, visual, and so forth.
So it's not revenue neutral after fees, for example? Registration fees?
No, most of our events are not. Our educational forum, we do charge a registration fee. Mm-hmm. We try to keep it minimal because it is a cost to the employers that we're trying to bring there and educate. But it is not a wash. The educational forum can cost anywhere between $300,000 to $400,000 each time we hold it. Again, depending on locations, we find that Northern California is more expensive than Southern California. California because they have just more facilities that meet our needs.
Thank you.
Sure.
I also wanted to comment on the frequency of the investment committee meetings. And I want to thank the investment staff for their hard work. So as a chief investment officer myself and having led funds, I understand the amount of time that it takes, and I understand that there will be multiple influences. From what I've seen, the most frequent investment committee meeting is quarterly. I've seen it semi-annually, and I've seen it annually. So this is very different. I understand that this is a public board, but there are other public boards too, such as one that I've led in the past, and we met quarterly as a board, with the investment committee meeting quarterly in between board meetings. So there is some precedent for that. It can be very challenging to provide the information that the board needs, especially in times of economic uncertainty. And so there are many platforms, some of which have been discussed, through which board members can educate themselves. We can get updates, economic overviews, things of that nature, so we don't have to use this time. But I do think it's very critical to the performance of CalPERS fund that the investment team be able to focus. I really do. There are 20 work days in a month. Right now, 3 of those days are dedicated to board meetings, to attending board meetings. That does not include any of the preparation time or any of the follow-up, which I would estimate is a minimum of 2 days. So that takes out an entire week. It is very hard to track the market and make the necessary corrections if you're here on a monthly basis. Very hard. Thank you.
Ms. Taylor.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I will thank you guys for this and thank the board members who put this together, Mr. Miller and Ms. Middleton. I believe that we should pare down our meetings. I'm not, I know that, I think Ms. Middleton said that we could have that as a bare minimum and then schedule more. Is that what I heard? Which is fine with me. I heard Mr. Fechner say that maybe going down to 4 is too quick for us, or too much. I can't remember the word you used, sorry. So maybe we could meet in the middle and make a motion to go down to 6 meetings rather than 4 meetings. That's up to the committee. I'm not on the committee. I will say I've been here for 5 years. I do know that it takes more than a week for our investment office to prepare for these meetings, especially when it's trust fund review, any of our large reviews that we come across. It takes almost the entire month for them to prepare for the meeting, then the 3-day meetings, and then I would imagine they do the debrief. So let's be clear that it is very time consuming and it does take our staff away from their job. So whether, yes, we are here in the public, but the other thing is if staff is preparing documentation for a downturn and they see, here's some information everybody needs to know, it'll be on the Insight tool. And we can review that, we can make phone calls, we have the ability to call folks. If our stakeholders need to hear this information, I'm sure that we can, if we feel it's public information, we can put it out on the website. They have access to the website. But I think it's very important, if we are to make a 7% return at 70% funded, that we focus. Has it changed? I don't know whether or not it's changed our returns. I do notice a difference in returns since Ben has gotten here, so let's be clear that if we're going to make sure that Ben gets his vision through, which he said is going to take time, we need to give him time to do that. So again, I would recommend whomever on the board to meet in the middle and do a recommendation for 6.
Okay. Ms. Yee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had also a couple questions for Ms. Dominguez, and that is one of best practices and whether committees of the whole are, it seems like something of a past time, but was it a best practice? And if so, what was the rationale?
I'm sorry, the question was were committees as a whole
Yes.
best practice?
What has it ever been a best practice? And if so, what was the rationale or the origin of the thought of that?
Right. The whole, well, as we've talked before, you're looking at board structure, you're looking at operational oversight, you're looking at strategy, one of the primary responsibilities of the board. So the concept of committees came about as a way of decentralizing and allowing for the acquisition of expertise and knowledge among the various board members so that they could do the deep dive and then bring it up to the full board. So to my knowledge, although there are some in the nonprofit world that are, I would say, committees of the whole, it really is, it's almost like an oxymoron, to be honest, because it's the whole focus of a committee is to delegate some of these responsibilities so that the individuals can have the expertise, the efficiency, and the accountability. One of the challenges when you have a committee of the board, of the full board, is that there might be sort of a tendency to defer to the individuals with the deep expertise. And so the whole board doesn't really identify the accountability of the expertise of each individual. So when you have committees and you assign the board members to the various committees based on their expertise, it doesn't obfuscate the accountability of each board member. So that was one of the rationales as the evolution of boards and the board structure and the composition. That was one of the rationales for making sure that that happens. So I serve on the Calvert Funds Board, and we meet 4 times a year. We do get reports when necessary. We get updates. If we have to have a meeting, we'll have a board call. In your instance, because of the uniquenesses of CalPERS, I heard that you would have the flexibility to call a special meeting or to add another meeting based on the workload. But I do think that what's really important is to keep in mind that the primary role of a board is that of strategy and making sure that the risk is managed along with the other components of talent and succession planning. So to the extent that you have the flexibility to establish these meetings as you deem appropriate based on the different committees, I think that's a plus. It's unique, but most boards the committees meet 4, maybe 5 times a year. And I am not aware of any board having a committee of the whole as a leading practice.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I'm thinking through each of these recommendations, and I'm trying to thread the needle among each of them because it seems to me, I know there's been some practices with respect to a good rationale for having quarterly meetings, but to me, it's really the quality of the meetings and what you do with your time. And so, and I just have to say, I'm having a little bit of a hard time thinking about how we transition from the investment committee being something other than the committee of the whole. And I get it, the first bite, second bite of the apple in terms of the board, then looking to ratify the committee's recommendations. But everything we do in investment committee is about oversight. It's about policy. It's about strategy. It's about, that gets lost in a board meeting by the time it gets to the board. So those who wouldn't be serving on the committee, I think, would not have the opportunity to, well, they could come to a meeting, I suppose, and be engaged. But this is our bread and butter business of this fund. serving on this board. And so I'm feeling like we're in some ways kind of diminishing our role by moving in that direction. Reducing the number of meetings, I'm probably not as exercised about if the meetings are using our time in a very quality way. And I think certainly with the use of the platform, there are things that don't need to take up actual meeting time. Maintaining the current schedule of the board meetings, I'm not sure what that buys us if we don't have committee meetings kind of meeting the same number of times. I don't want to make work and just have board meetings either. So I'm looking at maybe encompassing one of those board meetings to be, the annual stakeholder forum, and maybe having one be the strategy offsite. I want to give the investment staff as much breathing room as possible, but I also don't want to be taken for granted. So I want information. I want us to dig deep. I would hope that anyone on this board who has an interest in serving on investment committee has the opportunity to do so, because I do think the broad array of perspectives we bring and the expertise we bring makes us has us come to richer decisions. But I'm feeling like we're kind of cutting and dicing and not really getting to, I think, how we can be the most effective in terms of carrying out our duties, which I think is kind of the whole point of governance. I guess what I would say is one, strategy offsite is fine. Annual stakeholder forum is fine. I would be happy to convert one board meeting to be an annual stakeholder meeting. People are used to meeting here in Sacramento. I think people have an easy time in getting here. I think the quarterly meetings I would be fine about if I could be assured that we would have ample communication in all ways in the intervening time. I'm not so sure about maintaining the current scheduled board meetings because I don't know what that means, why we would need that then. And then the consistent structure for board meetings, I would say probably yes, with the exception of investment committee. So.
Okay. Mr. Miller.
There we go. Okay. Just two things. One, this idea that I'm not on this committee. I think for the audience, unless you've memorized who's on the committee, or maybe from the seating arrangement, although we've got folks at each end who aren't, I don't feel I'm a second-class citizen. I don't feel on this committee that the chair is not allowing me the opportunity to participate fully. And any decision that's made, I will get to actually make motions and vote when it comes to the full board. But I benefit from the work done by this committee, and if I want to participate, I may. None of that will change with these recommendations. That's the whole point. We're adding more to the problem. We're not taking anything away, and I have a sense that people feel like this is trying to take something away from them, and I don't know where that comes from. It's not about them. It's about how do we enhance our performance. As far as the schedule of keeping basically a monthly board meeting, but having the schedule of the various committee meetings coordinated with that so that we have quarterly meetings, but for example, we would certainly be deferring to Rob if he said, okay, we've got 4 quarterly meetings scheduled for investment committee, but we need to add another one. So on this month where it wasn't scheduled, we're going to add one because of the circumstances that require it or need it. But I would suggest that perhaps putting them on the calendar without knowing we need them would then, it pretty much guarantees you're going to have them whether you need them or not. So I would, urge you to move the recommendations as written, knowing that there's the flexibility to address that issue. And if we need more than a quarterly meeting or need an ad hoc meeting, we can certainly schedule it.
Mr. Perez.
It seems like we're trying to make something happen just to fit the nomenclature of a subcommittee, and it doesn't feel right. So I will motion that we keep the investment committee as a committee of the whole, and I will motion that we go to 6 meetings a year, not counting the offsite or any kind of education. 6 like meat and potato meetings, and by meat and potato meetings, I mean that any kind of the reports that we need, no presentation from staff. Let's free up them time. They can provide us that information with the Insight tool, and this is all predicated that the Insight tool will indeed give us the time and the time we need to read that information before we make any decisions.
Okay, Mr. Perez, you made a motion, and I'm going to accept that motion, and if you get a second, but we have at least 6 other people who want to speak, so I don't want to take action on that until we've heard everybody, and then go back to Ms. Rodriguez to hear. And I see the public also raising this, Mr. Woodson raising his hand. This is the item he wanted to talk about. So is there a second to Mr. Perez's motion first?
It can wait.
You can wait? Okay,
yeah,
you
absolutely.
remove it? Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, Mrs. Pascal Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the leads who've worked really hard on this, and I know that it's tough. But I do support the committee structure, and I do appreciate the fact that that I can sit here even if I'm not a member of the committee and speak. I think that it's wise to have to have a committee structure and then go to the full board. Since just being here a few months, I've been concerned about yes, the investment team, but all of the team, because when you think about once we leave this room after that, on Wednesday, they aren't thinking about all the grand, wonderful things that they can do and are creative. They're working backwards on, notice dates and whatnot. And I worry that if we don't give them more flexibility to do their jobs, all the staff, that we could, we suffer because of that. So I feel very strongly about, I like paring down, but I also want to be mindful that if we're if we're not doing this right, or if you guys disagree, let us know. I think that I agree that it might be better to do a phase in if there's going to be any change, because I think sometimes an abrupt change, especially like this, will not only upset all of us, but it could really upset the stakeholders, and I'm mindful of that. I think, though, that the opportunity to try something out is always the good way to go. Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Ortega?
Lit up? Yes, yeah. Thank you. Thank you. I am also not on the committee, but I wanted to express my support for reducing the number of meetings, in addition to the items that have been mentioned about the staff's time and the ability for them to focus on their primary job responsibility rather than preparing for the next meeting is being good stewards of the fund. And I think that using our resources and the fund's resources efficiently is also part of what we should be doing. And when I look at even this week's meeting agenda, where we have tomorrow as being a very short day, where we could have combined that into a fewer number of days. I know the first couple of months I was here, we had several days of the 3 days that were half days, and I don't think those are good uses of our time. That means people have traveled here when they could have maybe had one fewer hotel night, one fewer night of per diem. They could have gone back to their day job. There are lots of ways that I don't think that the current board schedule uses the time or money of the fund efficiently. So that'd be another reason why I would support reducing it down. I think Ms. Taylor and Ms. Perez's comments about the 6 rather than the 4 is perhaps a good place to land. I think if I were on the committee, I probably would second that motion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Brown.
Thank you. As we're talking about having a board meeting every month or a board of administration meeting every month, I think that is actually wasteful because you're paying for flights, which is the most expensive part. So if you're going to reduce the days, the number of months we meet, then we should still go back to 3 days, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, if you go every other month, kind of like STIRS does. And I'm just wondering, it's kind of nice to have Monday, Tuesday, then think about what happened, and then you come back for the full board meeting. You have some time on that Wednesday. And I'm wondering, does anybody have a conflict with meeting on Wednesdays? We typically meet the third Wednesday of the month, and I just want to make sure that we're not changing this just because somebody has a conflict with meeting on the third Wednesday. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Rubalcaba.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the discussion and the deliberation and other work that the other work streams have done, particularly this one. And I am on the committee, and I was prepared to make a motion, or also to motion if the need be, that we accept the recommendations from the Workstream team from Workstream 3, with the exception that the investment committee, I see the merit in the discussion that the investment committee meets 6 times a year rather than 4, but also with the understanding that the quarterly meetings for the other committees be a minimum, and it's be up to the chair and the vice chair of the committee whether they need to do a special meeting. So that would be my motion, or substitute motion as the case may be, after we hear from Kerry.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think I'm going to take a turn here. I think that I could support reducing the number of meetings. I think it would be rather disruptive, though, to be on call for meetings, because people have other lives, that even staff may plan vacations, and then you all of a sudden call a meeting and staff is on vacation, or I may be on vacation and you call a meeting, and so I think it would be just a little disruptive in terms of calling a meeting on the last moment for people to then gather. I think if you want to reduce the number of meetings, I think the appropriate approach would be to cancel a meeting rather than trying to add one, if you wanted to do it. But I could support the 6 meetings. I think that the comment was made about the investment committee having a final decision as opposed to having 2 bites at the apple. You always have the opportunity to have 2 bites at the apple, because you could vote not to vote to approve an item on the investment committee and ask staff to bring it back. So you can do that as many times as you want. So I don't think it's a rationale to say you won't have an opportunity to have further discussion, because you have that 1 bite at the apple for the investment committee. And I think that I think it does make a difference when you are part of the committee in terms of your involvement, as opposed to just being at the end. So I would support us reduction of the number of meetings and quarterly meetings for the others, except the 6 months for the investment. But I would also support continuing at this stage to have all the members part of the investment committee meeting. So that's my view on this subject so far. So now we go back to oh, wait a minute, we got another one. Mr. Rufino.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Although the Treasurer Fiona Mai is not a member of the committee, and therefore we don't vote, but I would like to I would like to express our support for the reduction of the meeting, and I think the great controller, Eddie, hit it right on the nail. It's quality. It's not frequency. And I have this little flashback in my previous life, being a member of a board, and we used to meet 2.5 days a week. 2.5 days a month, and for many years. And then when the recommendation came to become more efficient and be able to accomplish even more, and to reduce not only the meeting dates from 2.5 days to 1 day, or 1.5 if it was needed, but also reduce the frequency of the meeting to quarterly meeting. and everybody was like, no way, it's not going to work. There was so much opposition, and folks were just not ready because we resist change. We don't know. Change, by the very nature of the definition, gives us all stress and anxiety because we don't know. Let's be a little bit more optimistic and have faith, first of all, in our staff. And I haven't heard any negative comment about Mr. Bang and his ability. So let's give him the time that he needs, and let's us, we can change again if it doesn't work in a year from now. We can go back just like we do it now or next time around. But I think it's about quality, it's not frequency. And by the way, I'm happy to report that particular group, we did well. We now, like, one day and we are done, and we're very efficient, we're saving money, we did all the right things. So for whatever it's worth, that I just wanted to share that little personal anecdote, about my personal experience. But the treasurer does support a reduction in the meetings. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Ms. Middleton.
Yeah, I think we've got some choices to make, and we can plow through this and try to do this here from the dais today in terms of all of these recommendations. Some it's pretty clear where the majority of everyone is. But one alternative always is to allow this work stream to go accept these comments and come back with a proposal for the September meeting that would be based on everything that has been heard here today. I think some of the recommendations will be very easy to make, but others will have an opportunity if we, rather than try to decide today, we kick this to the next meeting. We'll also have an opportunity to confer with staff as to what works best for them and come back with a full set of recommendations that we can then debate and decide in September.
Okay. We have still more people to speak. Mr. Fackner.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm kind of up in the air whether or not we do it today or if we wait till September and let the committee work on it. But I guess my point when I said earlier the 6 meetings for investments, that would be either 6 investment committee meetings and then investments not be included as part of the offsite, or 5 investment committee meetings and the investment staff be part of the offsite. So the president and the CEO can make that determination, but not having them have to present to the offsite might free up even more time than they've had already, because that's a pretty big lift to move all their staff and everything to the offsite. So if we just went to 6 meetings and left them out of the offsite, could be able to give them an open opportunity.
That's a good point, good point. Ms. Brown.
Yes, thank you. I'm hoping that whatever the recommendation is, you come back with a sample calendar of how it would work. Be nice to see it rather than just talk about it. That's pretty simple to do. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Miller.
I would just urge the committee to move on this today, move these recommendations. We could kick the can down the road. I don't know that there's anything new you're going to hear from anyone. I think it's a decision that the board will then kick around some more and have the final say. And I just don't want us to fall into this pattern of, oh, well, we can't quite decide right now, so we're just going to push it off another month or two. And I think the issues are pretty clear. They're before you, and you've got a couple motions already that have been kicked out there. So I'd like to see you move it.
And I agree with Mr. Miller, because I don't think it's fair to have the staff just haven't heard all this and see which way we're thinking. I think we should make that decision to which way we want to go. So I think it'd be appropriate to have some kind of motion or direction to staff to come back with how this would look based on a recommendation. But before we do that, I want to go back to Mr. Ming. We have 4 people to speak on this item. And before I do that, though, I wanted to see what we have here. Just 1 minute. We have 4 people to speak. Okay, now did you want to hit your button though? I want to throw the red flag. Okay, hit your button though. I can't. Okay, there you go.
I'd like to make that motion I said earlier.
Could you wait till we hear the public comments first before you make the motion?
Yes.
Just so that we get all the input. Okay. Let's go ahead and hear the public's. Oh, yeah, we're going to hear from Kerry first because we had this request that she has an opportunity to comment. Then we're going to go to the public speaker and then motions.
Thank you. Well, I think you've illustrated the challenges before this board in terms of the different complexities of your governance model. I do think that, as I said earlier, I do think that as long as you continue to differentiate between strategy versus operational reports, because oftentimes, I heard 511 reports, oftentimes it's just sort of rear view, it's what's transpired, and that type of information shouldn't consume your time, your deliberations time. So it's very important for you to really differentiate what should be coming to the board for action, for oversight, versus what should the board be informed about for purposes of your governance. So I think that will differentiate what, the timing or the structure of your meetings, meeting times and meeting dates. But again, keeping in mind that whatever the model is, the overriding responsibility is one of strategy. And how are you supporting that strategy? Is it through the reports, or is it through other kinds of resources that you can invite to bring to the board? I don't know what the turnover issues had, I'm not sure if exit conferences were done, but it really is something to be concerned about in terms of the turnover that has happened at CalPERS, and whether that had something to do with the overwhelming amount of data. I don't know. But it's something that I think the board should certainly explore.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so now we have, as I call your name, the first 3 can come up to the mics, and you will have 3 minutes to speak. Mr. Jelinek, Mr. Hutchison, and Mr. Woodson. Mr. Jelinek, you will call first.
J.J. Jelinek. The trust documents charge the board with the responsibility to manage the assets of the trust. They also charge the board with the administration of the system. Staff considers the board a problem to be managed. This proposal is designed to make that easier. Meeting less frequently will not improve oversight. Trustees will face longer agendas that will be which will even further reduce the likelihood that board members will have the time or the inclination to actually read the material. It will provide more board travel time. Just yesterday, you did the annual review of what you and your agents have done in the opportunistic strategies. Can you tell me what the returns were? How about what the costs were? Does that include the opportunity costs? What were the opportunity costs? What opportunities did you see? What investments did you make to take advantage of those opportunities? Why? What opportunities did you identify but were unable to take advantage of? And why not? You did learn that you need more resources, but learned nothing about the types of resources you actually need. Do you really think less frequent meetings will improve your understanding? I urge you to either reject this or at least kick it back and think about it some more. Points I had not planned on making, but will since I have some time. Stakeholder meeting, if it is like the Ed Forum, it really will serve as an ability to tell the stakeholders what you think they need to know. Public comment will be available every month with the board meeting, except that your own rules say that the only thing you can comment on in public comment are things that are relevant to that agenda. And one of the other issues that's come up is people say, well, why does the board meet monthly? And I will, or continue to meet on its regular schedule. And I will tell you, quite frankly, it's because you've got administrative law decisions you have to get proved in a timely manner. And if you go to quarterly meetings, you won't meet that legal requirement. So I really urge you to either reject this or at least take Ms. Middleton's suggestion and kick back, think about it for another month. Thank you.
Good evening, Chair members. Dane Hutchings, representing the League of California Cities. There was certainly a lot to unpack here, so I'm going to focus really my comments specifically to the frequency of the investment committee meetings as the representative that represents the cities who will most assuredly be the ones who face the brunt of what is to come over the next 5 to 10 years. I can tell you wholeheartedly we are 100% in support of the investment team here at CalPERS, ensuring they have the tools they need to maximize investments. I would say that if your CIO is advising that you allow them to spend every waking moment they can forecasting and working on trying to maximize returns and not fixating on the past, creating 511 reports that really tell you where you've been and not where you're going, I think it's certainly something that we need to take into consideration. Furthermore, one of the things that the staff report mentioned is focusing on core duties. We need to ensure that our investment team is prepared, engaged, and spending time tracking the market and not up here every month spending time away from doing their primary duties. Moreover, I would say that there's a lot of issues with regards to the retention in the investment office. I would say first and foremost, we would, in the League of Cities would certainly be behind this. We need to pay their investment staff what they're worth so they don't get poached by the private guys. I think that's one big reason that we're getting turnover as well, but that's maybe a conversation for a different day. When we look at it this way, the employers are the insurers of this benefit, and as such, we support the staff recommendation to explore all options to maximize returns. Get them the time they need to focus on, moving in a direction of exploring more options for private equity. Let them focus on, steering away to these divestment issues and focusing on maximizing returns. And I should also note too that, like the state legislature, is with regards to folks who are on the committee, there are policy committees that are specified that are designed for the folks who have an experience in that matter. They discuss the policy implications at length, and then it's brought before the entire body for a full debate, discussion, and vote. Nothing would change in that regard. You certainly would have an opportunity to weigh in, share your opinions, and take a vote on that issue. And so again, the League of California Cities, I should also say, I was asked to speak on behalf of the California Special Districts Association, who cannot be here today, also in strong support of the committee, whether it's 4 meetings or 6. Let's cut this work in half for these guys and let them get to work. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Woodson?
Larry Woodson, California State Retirees. Thank you for the opportunity to address you again. In the preparatory information, there were 2 variables that were identified as key to good governance, transparency and stakeholder participation. I'm not sure, it was a little disheartening to hear from some of the board members that you've got enough information now to move ahead and not kick the can down the road, and yet that was before public comment. in Thursday's meeting, when I first learned of this, there was a how to get here slide, how did we get here slide, saying the opportunities for stakeholder input occurred in January, March, and June. And I asked Ms. Simpson at the time, what were those opportunities? What form did they take? And she said, you could have commented in 3 minutes at board meetings where updates were given, but none of those 3 months, the stakeholders meetings that were held, was this a topic for discussion. We were never informed this very important effort was underway. I learned for the first time about it on Thursday. So I don't think that is adequate stakeholder involvement. Specific content concerns, reducing committee meetings, especially for investments and pension and health benefits, is troubling. I hear some flexibility in terms of pension and health benefits, but in the 4 years I've been chair of that committee, Health Benefits, it deals with extremely complex, ever-changing health benefits issues. When I first became chair, the Pension and Health Benefits Committee met 9 times a year. Then it was reduced to 8 2 years ago. Then it was reduced to current 6. I don't think that's adequate. The workload for CalPERS has not changed in any of these areas. I don't think it's decreased. The committees is where the work occurs. And to say, as Ms. Middleton suggested, that the board meetings, not cutting back on the board meetings, will give us an opportunity to give input, that's not where we give good input, because it's the information exchange is in the committee. That's where we learn, and that's where really decisions are made. When they're brought back to the board for a full vote, then it's usually as the committee suggested. And so lastly, I would just say these meetings, if they're only 4 or even 6, they're going to be 10 or 12-hour meetings, and that's not going to be productive, and that's not good governance. So I would just end on that note. I hope you do discuss a little further and blend something, come back with something a little more flexible. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the next group speaker, Mr. Lennox and Ms. Jefferson. Jepson.
Called you first. Sure. Good evening, Chair and members. Derek Lennox on behalf of the Small School Districts Association, as well as the School Employers Association of California. You can probably tell by the organizations we're representing, I spend a lot of time with school employers. These are superintendents, business officials, and the staff that they work with all across the state. It's not often that they come up and ask me a question about CalPERS. Sometimes it's about their own retirement or health benefits or something along those lines. But when they do, the number one question they have is, what's going on with investment returns? Because they understand the very clear nexus between the good work that your investment staff does with respect to meeting return assumptions and the costs that they have to pay at the local level to make sure that pension benefits are paid out in the long run. We support pensions very strongly, so it's an important priority for schools, but at the same time, there's a really direct connection between the investment returns and the services that can actually be provided at the school site level. You've heard us talk time and again about the increasing kind of encroachment of pension costs, as well as other fixed costs such as healthcare premiums, special education, step and column, important things, but things that are rising across the school front. All of that collectively makes it more difficult to close the achievement gap, to provide lunches and breakfast to kids, to provide the essential services that we need across our schools. So I'm trying to bring it all back to the important work that your investment team does and what it means that you as a board are thinking about steps that you can take strategically to help them maximize those risk-adjusted returns, because that's something that we all really care about. On the other subjects that you have here, I'm really happy that you're talking about them as well. The stakeholder forum I don't know what that looks like yet, but I'm really excited for it. I think that your annual Ed Forum, you do a really good job of being accessible to school leaders. So the more that we can talk about engagement with stakeholders, that's a great thing. And the other thing that I'll mention in terms of the frequency of board meetings is I have the pleasure of not only monitoring and attending your board meetings, but CalSTRS as well. And you both do a really great job, but they have 6 meetings over the course of the year and 1 offsite meeting and an additional meeting that's in closed session for appeals. So the idea of going to 6 meetings for them from the stakeholder perspective wouldn't be totally irregular, makes total sense to us, and it's really about what the board thinks is best strategically for maximizing those risk-adjusted returns. So thanks so much for the opportunity to talk about these items. We really appreciate your consideration of them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kathy Jepson, CSU IRFSA. I apologize for running out of the room. I had put in a phone call to Dana Dillon, who is on the STRS board and I don't think she's currently the chair, but she's been the chair for many years. And I asked her the same question, how many investment meetings do you have per year? And the answer was 6 plus the 1 offsite. And then I asked her how many people are on the investment committee, and she said it's a committee of the whole, so that everybody that is on the board is also a member of the investment committee. I would support 6 investment meetings, but I would also support 6 pension and health benefit meetings, and I wouldn't include those, for example, in the April 2020 calendar. There is a meeting scheduled, but it is only a closed meeting. It is not an open meeting, but there's so many things going on with pension and health benefits that I would think that you would want to make that one 6 also. And you know, the 2 strategy offsites, I was on the freeway from the Oakland airport for a little over 2 hours going to the offsite. I wouldn't have a problem whatsoever of making it 1 meeting. And I think, Brad, that the annual stakeholder forum or forums is a great idea. And I would suggest you hold them here to keep the cost down. You've got rooms over here. It would work. And I think that's it. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we have another request to speak. Mr. Neal?
Good evening, Mr.
You
Chair.
have 3 minutes and identify yourself and your organization.
I won't take all of it, I promise. Jeff Neal with the California State Association of Counties. Appreciate the opportunity to speak here today on this issue. We also support the board and the committees having fewer meetings. Our own, just speaking from the experience, not only of our own board, but the boards of the counties that we represent, they do frequently meet more commonly or more frequently than this board does, but they meet for a much shorter period of time for each of those meetings, and so they make sure that they have time to deal with the business that they need to deal with, both strategically and in an oversight manner. They have subcommittees, the same as this board does, that meet again less frequently. So if the schedule that they keep, if they need more meetings, they're always free to add them on an as-needed basis, and they don't seem to have a problem doing that. I think that this board meeting less frequently, as others have said, would give the investment staff and the other staff more time to fulfill their primary duties, and then still be able to give full and complete reports to this body, to the full board, whether it's acting as a board or as a committee, to make the strategic decisions they need to make. So again, appreciate the opportunity to speak here today.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so that concludes the request to speak. Jason, you had the floor. Huh? Yeah, okay. You wanted to make a. Can I request that we separate the motion to deal with what I've heard is the investment committee as a separate recommendation, and the 6 month is a separate recommendation, or
not on the motion.
Okay, all right. Go ahead. Mr. Perry?
Not on the motion that I made, sir.
Okay, so go ahead and make your motion, because it wasn't, you took it back, so now you go ahead and make your motion.
Okay, so I motion that we go to 6 meetings, including investment for 6 meetings, but not so these meetings do not include offsites. Offsites are for educational, team building, stuff like that. And I motion that, I don't know how to word it, that the Insight tool provides us with the information that we need on the off months that we can study and raise questions and email the team about. And then that we remain a committee of the whole.
Okay?
I'll second.
Okay, that moved by Mr. Perez, second by Mr. Fector, that we go to 6 meetings for IC and also provide the Insight tool on a regular basis, and also continue the investment committee as a committee of the whole. All those in favor say aye.
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 Oppose? 1,
Opposed?
2. Let's vote back electronically so we can see who's.
I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, okay, clarification, go ahead.
This would
Miss-
be 6 meetings of the,
Oh, you need to,
She hit it.
yeah, but the problem is I can't get out of it. Huh?
okay.
Okay, she turned it on. I can't turn it on because of the vote.
So it would be 6 general board meetings.
Investment.
I thought it was both, so 6.
It's 6. The motion I had, or the thinking I have, was 6 meetings altogether.
6 meetings of the board, and those board meetings would include a presentation from the investment committee.
Yep.
Versus 6 meetings of the board and 6, okay.
Yep.
So those would be together. This would not include the offsite.
Correct.
And the investment committee would continue to be comprised of the board as a whole.
Yes. And good info from, excuse me, good info from Insight.
Well, excuse me, though. I think what I heard her question is it was combining the board and the investment committee. That's not what you're suggesting.
No, I'm saying that we all meet 6 times a year as a board for board business. And during that board meeting, we have a meeting with the investment team.
So you're saying during that period, we have an investment committee, which would be on a different day than a board meeting?
It doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
Committees, meetings.
Yeah, cancel the vote out. You clarify the, yeah.
6 times or 12?
So,
Can I make a substitute motion?
yes, you can.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will make a substitute.
Wait a minute, just, okay, could you, okay, I can control this now. Okay, go ahead.
Well, here we go.
No, go ahead.
I just procedurally, we did vote on his, so can I still make a substitute motion even though, I'm not sure if it passed or not?
We didn't finish.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I can make a substitute motion?
Yeah, you substitute.
Yeah, my substitute motion is similar to what I stated earlier. It would be based on the recommendations from the Workstream. And I'll go by bullets so everybody's clear. Consolidate 2 strategy sessions, offsites into 1. Institute an annual stakeholder forum. I'll separate it by the committees would meet at least quarterly. With understanding the investment committee will meet 6 times a year. And the health, pension and health will be as needed, which will be, could be 6, but at least 4. And that the board meetings will continue in the current schedule. Okay? And then establish the consistent structure for board committees. That would mean it would apply to all committees, meaning that the investment committee would no longer be a committee of the whole. That is my motion.
Second. Hold on. We started voting and we didn't finish. It was up there? People started voting to substitute motion.
He has a substitute motion.
Voting was improper because you didn't discuss the motion.
Right. So, Mr. Jacobs.
The substitute motion takes the place of Mr. Perez's motion, and then if it goes down, then Mr. Perez's motion would be up for decision.
Okay. And further discussion.
Yes.
Okay. Ramon.
So if I'm copying correctly, it's basically to do what the report said?
Yes. Mr. Rubalcaba, is that?
Yeah, just with one clarification, then instead it'll be at least quarterly as opposed to at least, because this one doesn't say at least quarterly. Make it the committee meetings will be at least quarterly, meaning the chair will have the option of making it more than, but with understanding that the investment committee will meet 6 times a year. That will be the only amendment to the recommendation of Workstream 3.
Excuse me, could you put back on the screen so we could see those recommendations? Okay. No,
Mr.
Rob.
Mr. Fickner.
Rob seconds, yeah, right. This, okay, just a minute. This is, yeah, okay. Okay, so this, yeah, Ms. Taylor first, and then she was in the queue.
So I would recommend, I can't vote, but I would recommend supporting this motion. Thank you very much. It's getting late, guys. Simply because I think we've made the change to 6. I think that's a good change. I think that gives us the ability to pare down the meetings while having enough meetings to satisfy everyone. But I also think it's very important that we stay consistent for the board structure for committee meetings and go down to 9 members for the investment committee. Because I understand that, I think Ms. Jepson said that CalSTRS has a committee of the whole for the investment committee, but it is an unusual makeup, and I don't know what the chicken or the egg came first, and whether PERS and STRS both decided to do that. But I think it's important that we are able to drill down into the work. Everybody gets to vote. Everybody gets to talk. As you can see, we are all here. We get to have commentary. We get to call, Robert's Rules of Orders or Rosenbergs Rules of Orders and say that vote was out of order. So we will have the ability to be here and make commentary and listen to everything that's being said. So I think it's important that we support Mr. Rubalcava's motion.
Okay, Ms. Middleton.
Okay. I like Mr. Rubalcava's motion, but I think for the purpose of clarity, so that everyone understands exactly what they are voting for, this would be easier if we would address each one of the 4 bullet points with an individual vote on each one of the 4, rather than trying to bring all 4 of them into one motion. And I say that again, strictly for clarity. It'll take a couple of minutes longer, but we'll know exactly what we're voting for.
So you could make a substitute motion then?
I'm offering that as a suggestion at this point.
Not a motion?
To the maker of the motion.
If it's a friendly amendment, I would accept it.
You would accept that as a friendly. Okay, so we now have a motion and a second with a friendly amendment. So, Mr.
I'm already on.
Perez?
If I might.
I think I confused myself. So what I'm saying is just 6 meetings altogether. Not nine meetings, just 6 meetings instead of 4. Did that come through last time or no?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, never mind.
Yeah. Okay, so.
If I might, the amendment is so significant that it really gets rid of the substitute motion if it's accepted by Mr. Rubalcava. So we have a motion from Mr. Rubalcava with several sections to it. And if he accepts the amendment, we're not really voting on Mr. Rubalcava's original motion. What I would suggest is that he withdraw that motion and put forward each component of that motion as a separate motion. Does that make sense, Mr. Rubalcava?
And I would do so.
Okay, so you withdraw it.
For clarity and for ease of voting.
Okay.
Wouldn't that change what I had already asked for so significantly?
Yes, but he's going to withdraw his substitute motion, which had 4 or 5 parts, and replace it with a substitute motion on 1 part, followed by additional motions with respect to each of the previous components.
Okay. Okay, so let's go, Mr. Rubalcava. You have the floor on your motion.
So now the first motion is to consolidate 2 strategy offsites into 1.
Second.
Okay, moved by Mr. Rubalcava, second by Ms. Middleton. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That item passes. Okay, Mr. Rubalcava.
The second motion is to institute an annual stakeholder forum.
Second by Ms. Middleton, moved by Mr. Rubalcava, second by Ms. Middleton. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That item passes. Mr. Rubalcava.
The third item, it's a 2-part. We would consolidate the schedule of monthly committee meetings into at least quarterly meetings while maintaining the current schedule of board meetings. So, in other words, the board meetings will still be monthly. The committee meetings, like, for example, the investment committee and the pension and health committee, the governance committee, will meet at least quarterly. The number of vote meetings would be determined by the chair. I think we've heard the investment chair say 6 times will be for the investment.
I'd like to make a motion, please.
Okay, it's a substitute motion, Mr. Perez. No, wait a minute, we need a
I copied that he said. Microphone.
Microphone.
Sorry.
Okay, Mr. Fechner second Mr. Rubalcava's motion, so now go ahead, Mr.
Did I
Perez.
understand right that he said he wants to monthly meetings?
Yep. Just a minute.
Did I understand correctly that, Ramon, you said we're still having monthly meetings?
For the board for this board of administration will be monthly, yes.
So
Maintaining the current schedule of board meetings, yes, monthly.
Okay. I say we go down to 6 meetings a year, including investment.
Okay, so that's a substitute motion. Is there a second? So the motion fails for lack of second. Okay. Mr. Rubalcava's motion. All those? Oh, huh? Just a minute. Ms. Brown.
No, I was going to suggest that Mr. Perez make the substitute motion he did, meaning that basically we would only fly to Sacramento 6 times a year for board meetings, including an investment committee meeting, and then any other meetings that need to happen, pension and health and things like that. I think you made your substitute motion and it died. So it looks like we're going to fly to Sacramento every month, it looks like. Thank you.
Ms. Ortega.
Yeah, I want to make the same comment. I think that connected to my earlier comments, the idea of having a monthly just standalone board meeting seems wildly inefficient to me. So I'm not voting, but I strongly recommend that the board not adopt that motion.
Okay. So that's the motion on the floor. So the committee, all those, would you repeat?
Sure, I'm sorry. Yes, once again, the motion is similar to what's recommended with one minor change, which instead of the committees meeting quarterly, it'll be committees meeting at least quarterly while maintaining the current schedule of board meetings, meaning the Board of Administration will continue its regular schedule monthly, and the committees would meet at least quarterly, with the investment committee meeting 6 times a year.
Okay. So the regular boards, 12 meet Board
of
monthly,
Administration, yes.
and the investment committee would meet 6, and all the others would meet quarterly. Is that
At least quarterly.
at least quarterly? Okay. Is there a second for that?
I'd like to make a friendly amendment.
Okay. Just a minute. Ms. Milton.
That in each one of
Okay. There it is.
My friendly amendment would be that committee meetings are organized in such a way so that every board meeting would also include at least one committee meeting, if not more than one.
Yes, we got to fly through 10 times.
That would be moving forward to be efficient, which I think is the whole purpose of this exercise. So yes, I will accept the friendly amendment.
Okay, so.
Thank you.
Is there a second?
I'm beyond confused. So we're voting now to still meet 12 months a year, right?
9 months a year.
See, we don't meet, yeah, we have 2 off-sites.
Whatever the
We
current
have an
schedule is.
educational right now. We have an educational forum and 2 off-sites now. So that's 3 times we don't meet as a board here. So that's 9.
Okay.
And so what I'm hearing Mr. Rubalcaba saying, to continue to meet those 9 times, but then the various committees would meet quarterly in conjunction with those meetings.
Except for Invo, and Invo will be...
Would meet 6.
And unless there's no committee, there's no standalone board.
Yeah. Is that kind of clear? Yeah. You got it? Okay.
I think so. That's 3 more meetings than what I said. So.
Okay.
Yes.
So let's see if we could.
Yes, it is.
We could vote on that then, because it's a friendly amendment. So all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It passes. Okay, you got, is that all of them?
Then there's one more point, one more motion, which is to establish a consistent structure for board committees, which means, in my reading, that the investment committee will no longer be a committee of the whole.
Okay. So that's the motion by Mr. Rubalcaba, is to establish consistent structure of all board committees, including investment committee. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Pascal Rogers. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Mr. Perez opposed. So the item passes. So I think that does it on this item. I think.
Can I take my vote back from the first one?
No. Okay.
No, really.
Okay, let's move on to the, beg pardon?
No, really. Can I think.
Just a minute. Yeah.
I think the purpose of this was to allow staff to do good work. And so I think that's a 6-meeting structure, not the 9. So can I change my earlier vote to no? It won't matter for whether it's going to pass or not.
The motion that passed, you're asking to change that vote?
Yes.
Don't you have to be on the prevailing side to change your vote? Yeah.
Technically, you do. It's so recently ago, though, that I don't see any harm in allowing Mr. Perez to change his vote on that one.
Okay, all right. Your vote?
So the point is that that particular motion, we have now a 1 nay vote, as opposed to previously it was unanimous.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so that's the vote. Okay, we now go to the last recommendation, I think.
Thank you, Chair.
Oh, before you start, could you get Ms. Dunning on the phone in case?
Not yet. The next item,
Okay.
we'll be talking about the code.
Yeah, just a minute before. I think we got to give the reporter a break, so let's take a 10-minute break. Yeah, 10 minutes, okay. Yeah, yeah.